I choose option Ferntine Elise Donovan, Marcus Elwood, Lillian Elwood. When I reached into my bag to cover the cost of a stranger's groceries, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was trying to steady the tremor in my fingers. Just minutes before, the woman ahead of me had leaned close to the cashier and murmured, "They cleaned us out after my husband passed." The sentence landed like a stone in still water, rippling through memories I kept locked away, because someone had once said almost the exact words to me right before they stripped everything I owned. So I slid 350s across the counter, my pulse racing, and then, without planning it, I unwrapped the crimson shawl from around my throat and laid it across her shoulders. She looked up with eyes that carried an ache I recognized too well, eyes that had once stared me down across a holiday table. My name is Elise Donovan, and I had no clue who she truly was. The message arrived while I was scrubbing antiseptic from beneath my fingernails after a 14-hour stretch in the ER. The subject line stopped me cold: formal supper, presence mandatory. No hello, no reply requested, just an order. Marcus appeared in the doorway before I could close the screen, reading over my shoulder with the sigh of a man watching a storm roll in. "Don't give her the satisfaction of tardiness," he said under his breath. "And whatever you do, leave the hospital out of it. Mother believes charity is the last refuge of the incompetent." I let out a laugh that cracked like thin ice. So what was I supposed to claim? That I mend people for sport? He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a folded sheet into my hand. Dress code, arrival window, forbidden topics. One bullet read, "No anecdotes about your upbringing." I tucked the paper beside my stethoscope, already tasting the metallic tang of a room where mercy carried no currency. That evening I dragged a midnight blue sheath from the depths of my closet and looped the crimson shawl twice around my neck, the one I'd stitched during a blizzard when the power failed and the needles were all I had. It wasn't kosher, but it was mine. In the hallway mirror I caught a glimpse of a woman who looked like any other exhausted nurse. "Stay honest," I told the reflection. "Even if honesty gets voted off the island." For the first time I wondered whether the summons was less about dinner and more about a verdict I hadn't volunteered to receive. I clocked out at 4:20, the main sky already bleeding into that bruised lavender that signals nightfall in winter. Snow drifted in lazy spirals across the interstate, each mile shaving another degree from the air. Marcus's warning looped in my head: "If you're late, she'll file it away like evidence." By the time the Portland skyline flickered into view, I realized I'd forgotten to wrap the bottle of Pinot I'd grabbed from the hospital gift shop. There was a superstore at the next exit. 5 minutes, I promised myself. Inside, the lights buzzed like tired bees, and the aisles smelled of bleach and burnt coffee. I was weaving toward the self-checkout when I spotted her, an older woman at the belt, palms shaking as she counted nickels and dimes. Her cart held 4 frozen lasagnas, a half-gallon of 2%, a box of newborn diapers, and an albuterol inhaler. The card reader spat out "Decalunid" in angry red letters. I meant to keep moving. I truly did, but when she knelt to chase the coins that skittered across the tile, something in my chest gave way. A snapshot had tumbled from her billfold. A younger woman in navy scrubs, smiling the small, tired smile of every shift nurse I'd ever met. For an instant I was staring at my own face from 10 years earlier. I stepped forward. "Let me get it," I said, soft enough that only she and the cashier heard. The total blinked 152.47. I tapped my card before I could second guess. No one should have to pick between breathing and eating. Tears welled in her eyes. On impulse, I lifted the shawl from my neck and settled it over her coat. "It's brutal out there. Keep the warmth." Her fingers brushed mine. Paper, thin but furnace, hot. Folks don't bother anymore. Maybe it's time they started. I wheeled the cart to the automatic doors, the wind slapping my bare throat like a reprimand. My phone read 1058. I was doomed to be late, yet for the first time in months I felt buoyant, as if I'd reclaimed a piece of myself I thought the world had repossessed. The wrought iron gates of the Elwood estate parted at 1619. Marcus waited on the portico, breath pluming, face carved from granite. 19 minutes, Elise. She'll tattoo it on her soul. I opened my mouth to explain, but he sliced the air with his hand. You always put strangers first. Compassion won't armor you tonight. The words stung harder than the cold. Inside, the foyer gleamed like the interior of a glacier, alabaster walls, travertine underfoot, chandeliers dripping light sharp enough to cut. A mahogany table stretched the length of a subway car. 30 pairs of eyes swiveled as we crossed the threshold, curiosity wrapped in practiced smiles. At the far end sat Lillian Elwood, spine straight as a ruler, silver hair twisted into an elegant knot. When her gaze met mine, my lungs forgot their job. Draped across her shoulders was my crimson shawl. The room seesawed. The wool I'd surrendered an hour ago now crowned the woman, whose approval Marcus treated like oxygen. He hadn't noticed. Mother, may I present Elise Donovan? She inclined her head a fraction. Welcome, Miss Donovan. You're fashionably on time. I managed a strangled chuckle, eyes magnetized to the familiar weave. It was impossible unless Lillian's stare held mine tranquil, omniscient. The edges of her mouth lifted a millimeter. Generosity merits discussion, she murmured, so low the crystal seemed to hush itself. Her voice slid under my skin colder than the storm outside. If paradise offered catered seating, it would mimic this dining hall, light fractured through prisms onto linen white enough to show fingerprints. My salad fork reflected a distorted version of my face. To my left, a state representative dissected tax loopholes between sips of Sancerre. To my right, a biotech hair boasted quarterly earnings over rosemary lamp. Lillian presided at the head, still as sculpture, watching me the way a chess master studies an unexpected move. Miss Donovan, she began, voice velvet over steel, Marcus mentions you labor in healthcare. I nodded. Harborview Community. A woman in pearls snorted. Community, isn't that code for indigent? Polite laughter fluttered like expensive muths. Lillian did not partake. Her eyes never left mine. Tell me, what gratifies you most about aiding those who cannot reciprocate? I swallowed. Sometimes they remind me who I am when I forget. The table froze. Marcus jumped in, voice pitched too high. Elise is underselling herself. She's practically administrative now, hardly soils her hands. Lillian canted her head. How tidy to orchestrate mercy from a distance. The barb drew blood. I answered low, steady. Mercy doesn't lose potency just because it's untidy. Cutlery scraped. No one spoke. I understood then this wasn't nourishment. It was inquisition. Lillian the magistrate, Marcus the anxious bailiff, me the accused clinging to the railing. When the sommelier refilled her glass, Lillian mused aloud, altruism is photogenic until the invoice arrives. The sentence speared me clean through. She knew. Dessert arrived untouched. Lillian rose like a queen dismissing court. Miss Donovan, the library, if you please. Marcus's fingers grazed my wrist beneath the damask. A silent beg, but I followed her anyway. The library smelled of leather and beeswax, shelves soaring into shadow, ancestors glaring from gilt frames. Lillian poured chamomile with the precision of a surgeon. On the mantel, a sepia photograph snagged my breath, a younger Lillian in starched whites beside a man in front of a hand-painted sign, Elwood Free Clinic, Est, 1987, same face as the wallet snapshot. You made a detour en route, she stated, not asked. I nodded, throat dry. Superstore. A woman short on funds. Amount, $152.47. And the shawl. She recited facts like scripture. Why? Because character shows clearest when the audience is invisible. I met her eyes. Do you traffic in examinations, Mrs. Elwood? Only the sort that don't weaponize another's desperation. Something tender flickered across her face, then vanished. She unlocked a vitrine and lifted another frame, her husband, smiling, arm around her younger self. Thomas used to say decency is the sole dividend that compounds forever. I lost faith. Maybe you invested in the wrong portfolios. For a breath, humanity surfaced. Then the mask slid back. Marcus will drive you. Thank you for the delay. As I reached the threshold, the butler murmured without lifting his gaze. You returned her reflection to her. The night slapped me awake. She had orchestrated everything, and the trial was merely recessed. 72 hours later, coastal Maine lay under a carapace of ice. In the nurse's lounge, I scrolled bleary-eyed until a push alert froze my thumbs. Lillian Elwood photographed pushing cart at superstore. Harris Hunt's bargains. The grainy image showed a woman in charcoal wool, crimson shawl, face angled away. My stomach lurched. No one noticed the second figure, me half-cropped at the edge. Colleagues clustered around the vending machine. Can you picture the Queen of Elwood Enterprises scanning coupons? I manufactured a grin while adrenaline spiked. That afternoon Marcus rang. Voice brittle. Mother's livid. Tabloids think it's a PR stunt. She's hunting the witness. Maybe she simply. You don't get it. Exposure is her kryptonite. If she learns it was you. He didn't need to finish. Fear vibrated through the line. Shift over. The charge nurse handed me an ivory envelope sealed in wax. Inside, Lillian's unmistakable script. You saw me when I begged anonymity. Let us conclude our dialogue. I read it thrice, pulse drumming. Fury eclipsed dread. Why stage a crucible for an outsider? Because in her stratosphere, tenderness was a liability. I pocketed the note and whispered to the empty corridor. Very well, Mrs. Elwood. Your move. The following evening I returned to the estate alone. The butler ushered me to the west parlor, where firelight licked the walls. Marcus was absent. Lillian sat in a high-backed chair, the shawl folded on her lap like a sleeping cat. You came, she said, wonder softening the edges. Most manufacture excuses. Was it truly you in that checkout line? It was. Why the theater? I required a mirror held by unbiased hands. I once believed goodness was common currency. Then the board shuttered our clinic for margin, and Thomas's heart gave out in the parking lot. I buried faith with him. She produced the clinic photograph. So you auditioned me to see if decency survived. And discovered my son intends to marry a woman with more spine than he's ever borrowed. She slid a check across the table. Harborview Community Health, 7 figures. Let mercy inhale. I pushed it back. You can't repurchase what you traded away. Her smile was small, genuine. Then the funds are safe in your custody. She lifted the shawl and draped it over my shoulders. Warmth is only currency when circulated. Firelight painted gold across her cheekbones. You flunked Marcus's punctuality exam, but you aced mine. The wool against my skin felt like absolution. 7 nights later we gathered again, this time only 3 settings. The hearth crackled, cedar smoke curling like incense. The ancestors on the walls seemed less severe. Lillian spoke first, voice stripped of armor. Marcus, do you understand why I staged the charade? He clutched his glass until knuckles blanched. Because trust is alien to you, even with your own blood. Incorrect. Because I needed to discern which of us still possessed a pulse for something larger than ledger lines. The logs shifted, sparks ascending. I sat motionless, both spectator and exhibit. You reported Elise tardy, undisciplined. You omitted that her delay purchased another woman's dignity. You assumed I craved perfection. I craved integrity. Marcus's shoulders folded inward. I've spent decades polishing your pedestal, and you taught me rectitude and righteousness are not synonyms. Moisture tracked his temples. Lillian's gaze gentled. She turned to me. He warned you to excise charity from conversation. You refused. That was the tell. Tell of what? That you prize kindness over membership. The sentence lodged behind my sternum. She lifted the shawl from the settee. Tenderness amid climbers is rarer than heat in January. Guard it. Marcus bowed his head, tears splashing the tablecloth. I only wanted your pride. You earned it tonight, she whispered. She pressed the shawl into my palms. It belongs to the soul who recalled what warmth costs. The flames flared, gilding us all. Marcus threaded his fingers through mine. I'm unworthy. Then level up, I answered. Pursue goodness, not gross revenue. Outside, snow descended in languid forgiveness. For once the cold felt optional. 30 days later the press finally sniffed the story. The Portland Gazette banner screamed, Elwood Foundation revived, adds $1 million to public health. Beneath the fold, the new logo, a crimson shawl knotted into a heart. I read it in the cramped office I'd inherited when the donation created a new wing. Nurses burst in waving the paper. Elise, Lillian Elwood is bankrolling us again. I smiled, full and quiet. She hadn't merely reconciled with memory, she'd weaponized it for repair. That afternoon Marcus appeared in jeans and flannel, tie abandoned somewhere between repentance and relief. He surveyed the ward, a pediatrician humming to a feverish toddler, a janitor joking with a chemo patient, life pulsing in ordinary miracles. I owe you contrition, he said. You and Mother both showed me love isn't audited, it's enacted in obscurity. He exhaled a decade of tension. She wants you to chair the foundation. I shook my head. I'll consult, but my zip code is 04101, Harborview's lobby. He laughed, the sound lighter than I'd ever heard. She predicted refusal. At the door he paused, producing a tiny envelope. Inside lay the superstore receipt, creased and tea-stained, 15247 in faded ink. Evidence that grace can outrun disgrace. I traced the numbers until they blurred. Laws, markets, reputations, all mutable. But a 3-inch slip of thermal paper held the only immutable truth. The tiniest ember of decency can warm generations. 3 winters on, I still walked Harborview's corridors, same antiseptic bite, same burnt coffee, but now a brass plaque beside the elevator read Harbor Hope Community Fund. E. Donovan, Director. My office walls carried framed thank yous from patients we'd kept breathing, but my gaze always snagged on the crimson shawl, preserved under glass beside a candid shot of Lillian taken the week the foundation launched. The wool had faded to rust, yet morning light still found the fibers and set them ablaze. Lillian had slipped away the previous spring, painless, mid-sentence while dictating a grant letter. Her final missive arrived scented with hospital soap gratitude for restoring my faith in February's. I kept it beneath the frame like a pressed flower. Outside, snow drifted in the same unhurried rhythm that once ferried me to judgment. A hesitant knock. A young mother hovered in the doorway, clutching a prescription print, out eyes swollen. Pharmacy said insufficient funds. I'll return when. I rounded the desk. We'll cover it. Her gaze widened. Strangers don't. Perhaps it's time they remembered how. I watched her leave with amoxicillin and diapers, shoulders squared against the wind. When the door clicked shut, I returned to the frame. The shawl caught a sunbeam and pulsed like a quiet heart. I stood there long enough for the corridor to empty, the building settling into its nighttime heartbeat of beeps and murmurs. Ordinary kindness too modest for headlines, the sort Lillian had once despaired still existed. I brushed the glass and whispered, "Mercy matters most when it makes no noise." Beyond the window, snow kept falling, endless and serene. Somewhere in that white hush I pictured Lillian smiling, her warmth woven into every unseen choice to care. And as I turned back to the charts waiting on my desk, I felt the circle seal. What sparked as one impulsive gesture in a fluorescent aisle had kindled a legacy vast enough to outlast us all. The years folded forward like pages in a book I never expected to author. 5 winters after Lillian's passing, Harbor Hope had grown into a network of satellite clinics stretching from Kittery to Caribou, each one painted the same soft blue as the original ER walls where I'd once bandaged my first bleeding child. My office had migrated to the top floor of the new Donovan wing, named, to my eternal embarrassment, by a board that insisted on honoring the nurse who kept showing up. The crimson shawl still hung behind my desk, now flanked by 2 smaller frames. One holding the original Superstore receipt, yellowed and laminated, the other a candid shot of Marcus on his knees in the pediatric playroom, letting a 4-year-old paint his fingernails electric pink. The photo was taken by a staffer who'd captioned it, "CEO in training." Marcus had insisted we print it poster size for the annual gala. That morning I was reviewing grant applications when the intercom buzzed. "Elise, there's a gentleman here who won't give his name. Says he knew Mrs. Elwood." I glanced at the calendar. March 12, the anniversary of Lillian's death, and felt the old tug in my chest. "Send him up." The man who stepped through the door was tall, stooped, wearing a threadbare peacoat and carrying a manila envelope. His eyes were the same startling gray as Lillian's. "Miss Donovan," he said, voice like gravel soaked in honey. "My name is Thomas Elwood Jeter. Most folks just call me Tommy." I stood slowly. Lillian had never mentioned a son. "You're..." The disappointment she buried in boarding schools and trust funds. He finished, attempting a smile that didn't quite land. "I was in Zurich when she died. Didn't make the funeral. Figured she'd prefer it that way." He laid the envelope on my desk. "She left instructions. Said to deliver this on the 5th anniversary, to the woman who taught her how to be late on purpose." Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream stock, Lillian's handwriting still sharp enough to slice paper. "Elise, if Tommy is reading this aloud, tell him to stop dramatizing. If you're reading it yourself, pour something brown and forget the ice. The Elwood estate is yours to repurpose. Not the money. Marcus has that headache. The house. The grounds. The ugly statues my mother-in-law imported from Florence. Turn it into whatever the world still needs. I spent 50 years making that place a museum of what I'd lost. You know how to make buildings breathe again. One condition, keep the library exactly as is. Some ghosts prefer their furniture unmoved." Warmly L. Tommy watched me fold the letter. "She was sober when she wrote it," he said quietly. 3 years sober. Said you were the reason she bothered." I looked out the window where snow had started again, fat flakes sticking to the glass like apologies. "What will you do?" I asked. He shrugged. "I fix boats now, in Boothbay. Salt air's cheaper than therapy." He hesitated. "She kept your shawl on the chair beside her bed. Said it smelled like possibility." I felt the prick of tears and blamed the dry office heat. "Come to the gala next week," I told him. "Bring your tools. We're launching a mobile dental unit. Could use someone who knows how to keep things afloat." The gala was held in the old Elwood ballroom, transformed into a winter garden with donated evergreens and strings of Edison bulbs. Marcus had spent months overseeing the conversion, sleeping in the East Wing amid drywall dust and contractor arguments. He greeted me at the door wearing the same pink nail polish from the photo, now chipped but proud. "Wait till you see the library," he whispered. They'd installed floor-to-ceiling glass doors so guests could peer in without disturbing Lillian's books. On the center table sat a single red knit square. Someone had started a new shawl, needles still stuck through the wool like exclamation points. A brass plate read in progress. Kindness is never finished. Halfway through the speeches, the lights dimmed for a video montage. Grainy footage rolled, Lillian at 75, hair now snow, white, pushing a grocery cart in that same superstore aisle. The camera, hidden, I later learned, by a teenage stock boy, caught her paying for a young father's baby formula with cash, then slipping a 20 into his coat pocket when he wasn't looking. The clip ended with her looking straight into the lens, eyes twinkling, mouthing two words, "Your turn." The room erupted. I found Marcus in the back, eyes wet. "She filmed that 6 months before she died," he said. "Made me promise to save it for tonight." Later, when the band struck up a slow waltz, Tommy appeared at my elbow. "Mind if an old sailor cuts in?" His hands were calloused, gentle. As we turned beneath the chandeliers, he spoke low. "Dad, Thomas Sir, used to say the sea doesn't care how rich you are, only how willing you are to bail when the boat's taking on water. Mother finally learned to bail." I laughed through the lump in my throat. She learned from the best sinkers. He glanced toward Marcus. "Now teaching a group of residents the electric slide. Think he'll be okay running the empire without the old battle." "Axe. Has running it with her," I said. "Just took him a while to hear the orders correctly." Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow into rivulets that ran like gossip through Portland's streets. The estate's transformation began in April. Architects argued over load, bearing walls while I walked the grounds with a clipboard, imagining vegetable gardens where manicured hedges once stood, a playground sliding into the space formerly occupied by a marble fountain of cherubs. The first demolition day, Marcus arrived with a sledgehammer and a grin. "Therapy's expensive," he declared, swinging at a Fox, Greek column. Dust plumed like surrender. We kept the library untouched, but added a small brass knob inside the doorframe. A discreet call button wired to the new childcare center we were building in the West Wing. Any kid who got scared at night could summon a nurse, a counselor, or just someone to read aloud from Lillian's first edition Little Women. One humid June afternoon, a courier delivered a package addressed in childish block letters. Inside was a child's drawing stick, figure me in blue scrubs, a red scarf flying like a cape, holding hands with a silver-haired lady under a rainbow. On the back, in purple crayon, "Thank you for fixing my grandma's heart. Love, Sophie, age 6. Taped to the corner was a new receipt, 15247, time-stamped the day before, from the same superstore. Someone had paid it forward again. I pinned the drawing beside the shawl. The wall was getting crowded with proof. Marcus proposed on the library hearth, of all places, on a Tuesday night when the contractors had gone home and the house smelled of sawdust and possibility. He produced no ring, just the original superstore receipt, now encased in a slim silver frame. "Marry me," he said. "And let's keep failing punctuality together." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We set the date for September, in the garden where the fountain used to be. Tommy walked me down the aisle, barefoot, because the grass was soft and he insisted sailors don't wear shoes on holy ground. The vows were short. Mine included a promise to keep choosing the long way home if someone needs the detour. Marcus vowed to measure wealth in warm necks, not net worth. Sophie was the flower girl, scattering knit red squares instead of petals. Somewhere in the rafters, I swear I felt Lillian clap. 10 years after that first late dinner, Harbor Hope celebrated its diamond anniversary with a community picnic on the estate grounds. The ballroom had become a teaching kitchen where recovering addicts learned to saute hope alongside onions. The stables housed a veterinary clinic for pets of the unhoused, and the library, still untouched, now opened its doors every Thursday evening for story hour. I read to a circle of kids whose parents had once been patients, my voice cracking on the parts where Joe March refuses to compromise. The shawl hung on a hook by the fireplace, free for anyone who arrived cold. It had been knitted a dozen times by a dozen hands, each new square a different shade of red, a patchwork of every life it had touched. That night, after the last child left clutching a cookie and a bookmark, Marcus found me on the veranda watching fireflies blink Morse code across the lawn. "Remember when being late felt like the end of the world?" he asked. I leaned into him. Turns out it was just the beginning of the story. Above us, the stars looked close enough to warm your hands. Somewhere inside, a new receipt was being printed, another 152.47 changing hands in the dark, another stranger learning that kindness is a relay, not a solo sprint. I touched the silver frame in my pocket. The receipt from our wedding day, now engraved on the back, paid in full, forever. The snow would come again, and with it new storms, new budgets, new reasons to doubt. But every flake that fell on the estate gardens would land on soil enriched by a single act of defiance in a fluorescent aisle. And every child who grew up swinging from the playground ropes would know, without being told, that warmth is not a seasonal offering. It is a decision, renewed daily, in checkout lines and boardrooms, in libraries and oncology wards, in the quiet space between one heartbeat and the next.